We're not American. We are people who formerly were Africans who were kidnapped and brought to America. Our forefathers weren't the Pilgrims. We didn't land on Plymouth Rock. The rock was landed on us.
Islam had arrived in America long before the racial turmoil of the 1950s and 60s. Millions of black slaves forcibly shipped to North America in the 18th and 19th centuries came from the largely Islamic nations of West Africa. Once they reached America's shores, they were stripped of their identities, heritage, and even their religion.
I have to accept that we were completely cut off from our past culture, and that includes Islam.
In 1930, Wali Farad, also known as Wallace Fard, created his own form of Islam in the poorer neighborhoods of Detroit. He claimed to be a prophet sent to help black Americans rediscover their heritage as both Africans and Muslims, and thus founded the Nation of Islam.
They were the discontents, and Farad knew that. He knew that if he could reach them with his message, many of them would accept it for a new mind and a new way of perceiving themselves and the real world.
Elijah Poole, the son of a Baptist minister, was one of Fard's earliest acolytes.
When he came to Detroit, within a few years, hard time during the Depression, he met Mr. Farad. He made such an impression on my father that he had my father as a willing and obedient servant till death.
Poole changed his name to Elijah Muhammad and became the chief minister of the Nation of Islam. In 1934, he took over the organization and over the next 3 decades gradually transformed it into a powerful political force.
Yes, sir. But I represent to you God in person. Yes.
One new member was Malcolm Little, whose part Egyptian mother had exposed him to Orthodox Islam in childhood. While an inmate at Norfolk State Prison in Massachusetts, Little became aware of Elijah Muhammad's movement.
He was doing, I think, 11 or 14-year sentence when he heard my father.
After joining the Nation of Islam in 1948, Malcolm Little adopted the last name of X as a rejection of what he termed his slave name.
No, what was your name? Yes, sir. And why don't you now know what your name was then? Where did it go? Where did you lose it? Who took it? And how did he take it?
After his release from prison in 1952, Malcolm X became the national spokesperson for the Nation of Islam, increasing membership and spreading Elijah Muhammad's word. But the ideology of the Nation of Islam cast the white man as the devil, a view not shared by Orthodox Islam, or even Malcolm X. Wrestling with his private beliefs and public role, Malcolm X was seen as a threat to the organization. In 1964, he was expelled. Not long after, he set off on what became his pivotal pilgrimage to Mecca.
It was on the pilgrimage to Mecca that his eyes were really open. He looked around and he said, my goodness, you know, there are people with blonde hair and blue eyes and people with very dark skin, and he saw that Islam was a religion of people of all races and all nationalities. And that really sort of gave the lie to some of what he was being taught by Elijah Muhammad.
Malcolm X returned from Mecca preaching an enlightened view of Islam, what many today call traditional or global Islam.
His charisma and his power as a personality was so great that all eyes were on him, and he came to the truth of the separation between the Nation of Islam and global Islam. And he did it in the public, he did it on stage, he did it on camera.
But this philosophical stance displeased more conservative members of the Nation of Islam. In 1965, as he spoke before a meeting of the Organization for Afro-American Unity, Malcolm X was gunned down by a group who many believe were conspirators from within the Nation of Islam. Despite his death, however, Malcolm X's vision of Islam would continue to steer the movement. When Elijah Muhammad passed away in 1975, his son assumed a new leadership role.
When the son, Waris Deen Muhammad, took over the organization, he had already made that transition with Malcolm.
And I told them, we are Muslims now, we are following the Quran. We should identify more clearly with Muslims all over the world.
In 1976, W. Deen Muhammad changed the name of his father's movement to the World Community of Al-Islam in the West. And today, most African American Muslims worship side by side with Muslims of all races and colors from every corner of the world. Some, however, rejected this reform and became followers of Louis Farrakhan's splinter group, which he also named Nation of Islam. But Americans were soon to be faced with more images of Muslims at odds with the West. This time, the flashpoint was Israel. From its birth in 1948, Israel has been the focus of a bitter territorial dispute. Many of its early opponents were not Muslims, but Palestinian Christians. In recent years, however, the conflict has taken on the qualities of a holy war. 1967. In the Six-Day War, Israel successfully crushed the military forces of the threatening Arab states. The victory would only escalate the tensions in the Middle East. 12 years later, Americans would awaken to the fact that they too were targets of rage, this time from fundamentalist Muslims. In the wake of a popular rebellion against the US-backed Shah of Iran, the Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, a highly respected Shia cleric, returned from exile in France to establish a new Islamic government.
The Ayatollah's revolution, which symbolized the response of ordinary Iranians, was also a response to modernity itself. How far would the modern age impinge on and change traditional life in Iran? A lot of people felt there were too many changes taking place and too fast.
Because it was seen as an ardent supporter of modernity at the expense of Islamic values, the U.S. was cast as the Great Satan. In 1979, Iranian revolutionaries seized the American embassy in Tehran, holding its diplomatic personnel hostage for 444 days.
The Ayatollah Khomeini was now transformed from an Ayatollah talking of religion and theological matters into a practical ruler. Now the big question, of course, is how a cleric transfers or transforms from a man of scholarship into a man of administration. And sometimes that transformation is not a very successful one.
In 1981, the forces of Islam turned against one of their own. Many Muslims were enraged that Egypt's president, Anwar Sadat, had signed a U.S.-brokered peace treaty with Israel. But the soldiers who participated in Sadat's assassination were Islamic extremists intent on establishing a fundamentalist Islamic state in Egypt.
There was real concern for the first year or two that there would be a major Islamic revolution in Egypt. That didn't happen. The average Egyptian was not inspired by the Iranian Revolution to move in that direction.
In 1990 and 91, America became directly involved in the Middle East conflict, leading an international coalition against Iraqi dictator Saddam Hussein's invasion of Kuwait in the Gulf War. Hussein's aggressive campaigns, however, had no connection with Islam.
Saddam Hussein is far from an Islamic figure. He is a military dictator, he's a tyrant, he tortures, his citizens disappear. He's gassed and killed the Kurds up in the north, he's killed and bombarded the Shias in the